Hi gang, so when people think of 40k, one of the first images that pops into their mind is that of a Space Marine. Power armoured super soldiers carrying bolt guns and chainswords fighting in the name of the Emperor. They're one of the most iconic images of the game and the most popular faction by a mile, so in this video I'm going to take a dive into their lore. Their history in the dark days of the Horus Heresy all the way through to the Indomitus Crusade and Primaris Marines of the 41st millennium, the process by which they're created, their organisation, and their slightly strange role within or apart from the Imperium. The Adeptus Astartes in 40k are the spear tip of the armies of the Imperium, an ancient institution older and more mysterious than almost any other. 1,000 chapters of 1,000 Space Marines spread across the galaxy and defending the Emperor's realm in whatever way they see fit. They exist almost on the fringes of Imperial society, as isolated monastic brotherhoods of near-immortal post-humans, still bound by the distant oaths taken by their primarchs and equipped with ancient arms and armour, much of it impossible for the Imperium to manufacture anymore. The Space Marines themselves are the pinnacle of Imperial genetic science, transformed through the use of gene seed into warriors faster, stronger, more resilient and more determined than any baseline human. Walking weapons able to endure the harshest conditions in an unceasing battle, and they famously know no fear. But this was never really the intention for the Space Marines, and much of their role within the Imperium of the 41st millennium owes a lot to events 10,000 years before, during the war known as the Horus Heresy, and the reorganization of the Imperium in its aftermath would force the Space Marines to adapt and become the knightly orders we all know from 40k. The history of the Space Marines starts in the late 29th millennium on Terra, as the Emperor cemented his hold on the planet during the Unification Wars. Genetically altered warriors were pretty common at the time, and the Emperor already had armies of them. The elite Legio Custodes, his bodyguards, were the pinnacle of his genetic art, but each warrior was a massive investment in time and resources to create. So instead, the armies of Unity were led by the 20 Thunder Warrior Legions, warriors mass-produced via crude augmentation and surgery to create soldiers who are faster, stronger, and more aggressive than any other army on Earth at the time, but also unstable, in danger of succumbing to madness or organ failure. As the Emperor cemented his hold on Terra and pushed out into space, well, what he needed was reliability. Autonomous legions who could spread out across the galaxy, reuniting the lost strands of humanity, capable enough to stand against any threat. And so the Emperor's greatest project began. With the aid of the perpetual Erda, the Emperor created 20 primarchs, superhuman demigods, in many ways his sons, to lead these new armies. And from their genetic material, he developed the implants and enhancements known as gene seed, that could be used to create his new warriors, the Astartes, named for the scientists that led the project. The 20 Legiones Astartes created using this method would have much more stable implants and enhancements than the old Thunder Warriors, could be created from any humans the armies might encounter while they're on campaign, and any genetic issues could be smoothed out by the presence of their primarchs. Elite self-contained armies to conquer the stars while the Emperor worked on the next steps of his plans. But disaster struck early on when the Primarchs were scattered to the warp, each coming to rest on human worlds across the galaxy and growing up in wildly different cultures to that of the Imperium. The Emperor was forced to lead the Great Crusade himself, setting out from Terra with the first Legionnaires created from what genetic material remained, and while the Crusade eventually recovered all the lost Primarchs and reunited them with their legions, problems started to arise. The legions at this time were the spearhead of the Great Crusade, forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands and equipped with the best the Imperium could create, from powered armour to esoteric fighting vehicles to the ubiquitous bolt gun. Over time, they settled on particular specialisms and honorifics, like the swift assault force that was the White Scars, the brutal resilience of the 10th Legion Iron Hands, or the stealthy infiltrators of the Raven Guard. The Primarchs and the Legionnaires that followed them were the heroes of humanity, the shining symbol of a new start as their expeditionary fleets pushed outwards, bringing human planets into compliance and wiping out Xenos threats, sometimes at great cost. 2 entire legions and their Primarchs were lost in the Crusade. Over 2 centuries of campaigning, they almost conquered the galaxy, supported by the mortal forces of the Imperial Army and the Mechanicus of Mars. But as time went on, they became more and more isolated from the Imperium they were sworn to protect. Having grown up on different worlds, the Primarchs, nominally brothers, had very different ideas about their father, the Emperor. Some, like Rogaldorn of the Imperial Fists, saw him as a shining figure of unity. Others, like Comrade Kurz or Angron of the World Eaters, saw him as a negligent father or a cruel tyrant. Some, like Lorgar of the Wordbearers, discovered the entities in the warp known as the Chaos Powers, knowledge of which the Emperor had kept hidden. And as the end of the Crusade drew near, many started to question what their role would be once it was over. These doubts were exploited by Chaos and eventually resulted in the Horus Heresy, a ruinous, decade-long civil war that set the galaxy aflame as Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the 16th Legion and War Master of the Imperium's armed forces, was corrupted and turned on his father, leading half of the 18 remaining Primarchs into rebellion. Horus's traitor forces pushed back those of the Loyalists at every turn, eventually resulting in the desolation of Terra itself and the siege of the Emperor's palace, only ended when the Emperor slew Horus in single combat, though at a great cost. To recover from his wounds, the Emperor was interred in the life support machine known as the Golden Throne, where he remains almost catatonic to this day. By the end of the Heresy, the Imperium was ruined, and the legions reduced to a fraction of their original strength. The traitors fled into the Eye of Terror, a great galactic warp storm, and over time they became the faction known as Chaos Space Marines, or Heretic Astartes. But the Loyalists started to rebuild. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines, enacted sweeping changes to make sure that no individual could hold so much power as Horus once did. As part of this, the old legions were broken up into chapters, a term borrowed from the old legion organizational standards and now used for a formation of around 1,000 warriors. One of these chapters would retain the name and heraldry of the old legion, but the others would adopt new names and new heraldry, often being led by veteran captains from the original chapter. This was called the Second Founding, and these new chapters became known as successor chapters, each an autonomous and self-reliant organization stationed to watch over specific areas of the Imperium, as the purpose of the Space Marines shifted from crusading and conquest to defending what remained. Not all the remaining Loyalist Primarchs and legions were happy with this, but eventually they relented, helped by the fact that, in the years before the Heresy, Guilliman's Ultramarines were by far the biggest legion, so rather than trying to take them on, Horus had merely delayed them behind great warp storms while he waged his war. The Ultramarines emerged from the Heresy at almost full strength, and so it was Roboute Guilliman, the Ultramarines, and their many successor chapters that held the Imperium together in the aftermath as the final elements of Horus's traitor forces were hunted down during a period known as the Scouring. The Space Marines adapted to their new organization over time, renamed from the Legiones to the Adeptus Astartes. The chapters looked to their own recruitment, maintenance and supply, and defended their corners of the Imperium from Xenos raiders and assaults by the descendants of their traitor brothers. Many adopted the teachings of the Codex Astartes, a tactical doctrine penned by Guilliman in the early days after the Heresy that laid out how a chapter should be organized. As the next 10,000 years rolled on, the remaining Loyalist Primarchs were each lost. Guilliman himself was mortally wounded and had to be held in stasis. As threats from Xenos and heretics grew and grew, the Imperium, now under the control of the High Lords of Terror, commissioned more foundings and more Space Marine chapters were created. Some directly from the gene seed of those original first founding chapters, some from other successor chapters, and some from gene seed reserves that were held on Terra. By the end of the 41st millennium, there had been 26 separate foundings, and the Imperium was defended by around 1,000 chapters of Space Marines, each a totally separate organization with its own beliefs and practices. These foundings were sorely needed. Over time, some chapters had been destroyed in battle, some had turned renegade, some had succumbed to barely hidden genetic flaws, and many more were chronically undersupplied and understrength. Their armour and equipment considered ancient, irreplaceable relics as the Imperium came under assault from the greatest chaos incursion ever known, Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. But as world after world fell and the Great Rift spread across the galaxy, the ancient Space Marine chapters received unexpected reinforcement. Through Eldari magic and advanced Martian technology, Roboute Guilliman was returned to life once more and took control of the Imperium, enacting the Ultima Founding. 10,000 years before, as the scouring played itself out at the end of the heresy, he'd commissioned the Mechanicum Majos Belisarius Call to start work on a new stage of the Space Marine project. These new Primaris Space Marines were bigger, stronger, faster, and considerably more resilient to genetic corruption, making use of additional implants and advanced new technologies developed by the Majos in his millennia-long research program. As Guilliman returned and rallied the Imperial armies, these new Primaris Marines were released from their stasis chambers and deployed across the galaxy, first in great grey shield armies fighting alongside Guilliman himself, and then either assigned to the ailing chapters to bolster their numbers, or formed into new successor chapters entirely made up of Primaris Marines. By the 41st millennium, it's these Primaris Space Marines who form the bedrock of the Adeptus Astartes, taking on the traditions of their firstborn forebears, defending Imperial worlds, and fighting alongside Guilliman as part of the Indomitus Crusade. The Space Marine chapters of the 41st millennium have a slightly removed relationship with the rest of the Imperium. Whereas many of the Adepta of the Imperium derive their legitimacy from the High Lords of Terror or Imperial law, the Space Marines predate the High Lords. They claim their authority directly from either their Primarch or the Emperor himself. Each chapter moves only at the order of their chapter master, and while other Imperial organizations might petition a chapter for aid, request reinforcement, or even try and threaten them, a Space Marine chapter is beholden to no one, save their ancient oaths to defend the Imperium. They maintain their own equipment and manufacture it in their forges, look to their own training, and form tithes of debt and reciprocation with either their domains or with other Imperial organizations to maintain supply and recruitment. And with 1,000 chapters extant across the Imperium, the manner in which they organize all this varies considerably. Many chapters have stewardship over a particular planet, claiming it as their domain to recruit from as they will, and ruling from a fortress monastery. Sometimes these are populous or civilized worlds, but often these chapter planets are kept in a primitive state to try and generate the hardiest recruits. The population might be aware of the Astartes walking amongst them, or speak of feared legends of the Emperor's sky angels coming to take away their young. And Space Marines are recruited young, typically before the onset of puberty, often through trials that become ritual for the human populations of their worlds. These processes are designed not only to select the most physically strong, fit and determined individuals, but more importantly, the most genetically compatible. The process of creating an Astartes is a costly investment, and rejection of implants a constant risk. Once accepted, the recruit has 10 years of permanent training and constant surgery to look forward to. His bones and muscles will be strengthened and his natural growth hormones enhanced, so that by his early teens he's likely considerably larger than an adult human. He'll be implanted with organs that improve his sight, hearing and reaction speeds and reduce the need for rest. At the same time, the recruit will endure a punishing regime of hypno-indoctrination and psychosurgery to both activate these new organs and condition them into fanatically loyal soldiers. By the end of the process, in their late teens, the recruit will be a 7-foot-tall super soldier, vastly stronger than a normal human, practically immortal, and with the ability to spit acid, enter suspended animation, and absorb their enemies' memories by eating their brain matter. But at the same time, much of what makes them human will have been burned away. Few recruits can process the full range of human emotions, understand art, or even remember their names or families from before they were recruited. They're often referred to as post-human or transhuman, something that used to be human but are now forever separated. Peerless warriors, the angels of the Emperor, immortal defenders of humanity, but also rigid, zealous fanatics, unable to relate any more to the baseline humans they're sworn to protect. As the recruits near the final stages of implantation in their late teens, they'll serve in their chapter's scout company, learning how to function on the battlefield and putting into practice all that hypno-indoctrination. The scout company is one of 10 companies in a traditional chapter, as dictated by Guilliman's Codex Astartes, though not all chapters follow it as rigidly as some do. The 10th company takes on reconnaissance and sabotage roles, fighting with light weapons and in lighter armor, until, by this point a veteran of multiple campaigns, the recruit receives their final implant, the black carapace that allows them to bond with and control Astartes' power armor. and from that point they're transferred into one of the line companies. According to the Codex, the likely next step will be service in one of the reserve companies, the 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th, each of which specialise in a specific role, either fire support with heavy weapon configurations like Devastator squads, or the Primaris Hellblaster squads, an assault company in a close combat configuration like assault squads, Inceptor squads, Outrider and Biker squads, or a line company comprised of tactical or intercessor squads, or serving as vehicle crews for the other companies. From there, the next step might be service in one of the chapter's 4 battle companies, the main forces deployed to an engagement, each consisting of a mix of the above units centered around a core of tactical and intercessor squads. Finally, if they survive, a grizzled and honoured veteran of the chapter might eventually find service in the first company as specialist veteran squads, all wearing the hallowed and ancient Terminator armour. Each company is led by a captain, along with a number of other officers like lieutenants, sergeants, or the ancient who bears the company standard, and also includes support elements like a motor pool of transport vehicles or dreadnoughts, massive heavily armed walkers containing the body of a mortally wounded veteran space marine. In theory, with each company comprising 100 fighting marines, this means a chapter should have an effective strength of around 1,000 marines, but that number is only ever a rough estimate. For one thing, they're always deployed, so there are constant losses, but there are also numerous other departments within the chapter separate from these 10 companies. The chapter Forge builds and maintains the chapter's equipment and armour. Its tech marines receive training on Mars itself by the Mechanicum, and the Master of the Forge controls the assignment of the chapter's heavier vehicles, battle tanks like the Predator or Repulsor, or heavy transport vehicles like Land Raiders or Thunderhawk gunships. The Reclusiam is the domain of the chapter's chaplains, responsible for both the traditions and ceremonies of the chapter, as well as the spiritual and, I guess, mental health of the chapter's warriors. I mean, given the training process, maybe take that with a pinch of salt. Most companies will be assigned a chaplain to inspire its warriors on the battlefield and reinforce the chapter's beliefs. While some Space Marine chapters, like the Red Scorpions or the Black Templars, follow the teachings of the Imperial faith and worship the Emperor as a god, the vast majority don't. Their traditions stretch back to a time when the Imperium was secular, so while they honour the Emperor and their Primarch as their gene fathers and primogenitors, they don't worship them, a point that has caused friction between the chapters and other branches of Imperial authority before. Speaking of gene fathers, the Apothecarian is responsible for the physical health and healing of the chapter's warriors, but also their recruitment and the creation of new Space Marines through the maintenance, recovery, and use of gene seed. The 2 progenoid glands are one of the many implants a new Astartes recruit is given, and they mature in his body as he ages, with one of them being removed a few years into his service, and another removed at the point of death. Each progenoid gland contains enough gene seed to grow implants for one new recruit, and so in this way the genetic legacy of the chapter and its Primarch is carried on in the bodies of its warriors. Each chapter maintains a store of gene seed within its Apothecarian, one of the most important and closely guarded areas of any fortress monastery, but the majority is contained within the fighting body, and so each of the companies is assigned at least one apothecary to administer the Emperor's mercy and recover progenoids from its dead and dying warriors on the battlefield. Finally, many chapters include a librarius, the organisation responsible for the training of the chapter's librarians, battle psychers who make use of the power of the warp. Librarians, like most psychers, are a breed apart from the rest of the chapter, often treated as wise and respected counsellors. Though in some chapters, particularly the more religious ones like the Black Templars, their hatred of the witch means they have no access to a librarius. And above all this is Chapter Command, led by the Chapter Master themselves, a veteran warrior with decades or even centuries of experience. While company captains might take on ancillary roles like Master of the Fleet or Master of the Watch, the Chapter Master is the only one who can determine where the chapter's warriors are deployed, and often combines the role of a general, a battle leader, and a planetary governor in one office. And of course, while the chapter has roughly 1,000 fighting marines, these are supported by many times their number of human staff. These are the people who serve in the forges, maintain the fortress monastery, arm and armour the fighting marines, and crew the chapter's spaceships. Depending on the chapter, they may be honoured and well-trained servants, or little more than impressed or indentured slaves. Many chapters deviate in ways broader than just that. While every chapter maintains a fleet of some size, chapters like the Marine's Errant are entirely fleet-based, responding to threats as and when they arise. These chapters may have traditional recruitment planets or arrangements for resupply with specific forge worlds, or might not, like the Karkarodon Astra, patrolling the deep, empty void on the Imperium's borders and returning once a generation to demand a tithe of flesh from Imperial worlds, taking the children for recruitment and everyone else for serfdom. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, cleave close to the organisation of the Codex Astartes, but others don't, like the Space Wolves, who maintain the same 13 great companies from the days they were a legion, though significantly reduced in size, or the Iron Snakes, where new recruits petition for entry to an individual squad, and where, instead of having companies, which squads are assigned to a mission is determined by the drawing of lots. And then cultural differences, markings, or traditions vary even more than that. Chapters often adopt the traditions of their home planet. They may appear glorious and inspiring or savage and primitive, like high-tech special forces or brutal barbarian warriors, depending on where they come from and where the observer comes from. While the classical image of the Space Marine is familiar to humans across the Imperium, few humans will ever actually see one. And when they do, it can be an unsettling or even terrifying experience. A transhuman dread engendered by their physical size and warlike manner, or just culture shock at how different and removed the Astartes are from the masses of humanity. The Space Marines of Warhammer 40k are a symbol for the Imperium in more ways than one. They're the mightiest warriors ever conceived, superior to a baseline human soldier in every way, but in many ways less than human. Child soldiers kept in a state of arrested development. They're immortal but live only to die in battle. They're the most potent armies at the Imperium's disposal, but its authorities can't give them orders, can't control what they do or where they fight. And while every child in the Imperium recognizes their holy image, in reality, they're often terrifying killers, the ultimate protectors with little regard for the lives of those they protect. And for every story of a glorious victory against the odds, there's a massacre, a rebellion, or a callous extermination to compare it to. The Space Marines really are the heroes of the Imperium, which should tell us a lot about the Imperium. Thanks for watching. And if you'd like to see more 40k lore videos, there should be one just popping up there on the right. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, like, subscribe, and there's a link to the Patreon in the thing below. See ya.